March 4, 1944. Luftwaffe Major Klaus Weissmann was sitting in the officers' mess at Wilnsdorf Air Base when the radio operator burst through the door, face pale. "Sir, they're here. Over Berlin. Right now." Klaus set down his coffee. "Who's here?" "American fighters. Long-range escorts. They're engaging our interceptors as we speak." Klaus didn't move. He just stared at the operator. Because what he'd just heard wasn't possible. It violated everything he knew about air warfare. It violated physics. It violated the fundamental mathematics of fuel, distance, and aircraft design. "That's impossible," Klaus said quietly. "Get me the flight logs. Now." 20 minutes later, Klaus was standing in front of a war-sized map with 3 other senior Luftwaffe pilots. What they were looking at made no sense. American P-51 Mustang fighters, single engine fighters designed for short range bomber escort were appearing over Berlin. Not once, not twice, but consistently, multiple times over multiple days. Berlin was over 600 miles from the nearest American air base in England. The calculations were simple, brutal, and ironclad. A P-51 Mustang had a maximum range of 400,450 miles with external fuel tanks. That was it. That was the absolute limit the American aircraft manufacturers had published. That was what every German aeronautical engineer had confirmed through their own calculations. To reach Berlin and back, a fighter would need to fly 1,200 miles. The math said it was impossible. Klaus ran his fingers across the map, tracing an impossible route from England to Berlin and back again. His hands were shaking slightly, not from fear, but from the cognitive dissonance of watching something he knew for a mathematical certainty could not happen. "This is a trick," one of the younger pilots said. "False reports. Mistaken identity. Those are fighter bombers, not pure fighters." "Look at the engagement reports," Klaus replied, pointing to the documents. "They're outturning our Bf-109S. They're matching our FW-190S in a sustained dogfight. These are fighters, pure fighters, and they're 600 miles from home." Another pilot, Hauptmann Friedrich, stood up abruptly. His face was flushed. "Then where are they coming from? Secret bases in France, Africa? Are we missing an entire airfield?" No one answered because no one had an answer. What happened over the next week sent shivers through the entire Luftwaffe command structure. American fighters didn't just appear over Berlin once. They appeared every day, in greater numbers, with more confidence, escorting massive formations of B-17 bombers deeper into German airspace than ever before. The interceptor pilots started reporting something that terrified them more than any weapon could. "They're not worried," one Bf-109 pilot reported after his third encounter. "They should be running low on fuel. They should be desperate to get home. But they fight like they have all day. They fight like they're not afraid of anything." Because they weren't. Klaus began receiving reports that made his blood run cold. German pilots were panicking, not during combat, but before it. They were seeing American fighters where those fighters mathematically could not exist, and it was breaking something in their minds. One experienced pilot, flying over Hanover, reported seeing a P-51 at 25,000 feet. The German pilot engaged. They fought for 12 minutes. The American pilot was calm, patient, almost disinterested. When the engagement ended, the P-51 simply turned and flew back west completely, unbothered by fuel concerns, completely unconcerned about making it home. "It was like he knew something I didn't," the German pilot told Klaus after landing. "It was like he had a secret. He did, but Klaus didn't know it yet." Klaus became obsessed. He couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. He was a man watching the laws of physics break down in real time, and it was driving him mad. He ordered reconnaissance. He demanded intelligence reports. He personally calculated fuel consumption rates, cross-referenced aircraft specifications, triple-checked every number. The results were always the same: impossible. He started writing letters to Luftwaffe High Command. His first letters were measured and professional. By the 4th letter, his desperation was showing through. "Gentlemen," he wrote, "I have confirmed through multiple sources that American fighters are conducting sustained combat operations over Berlin and surrounding regions. Our current understanding of aircraft range makes this impossible. Either our intelligence on American aircraft specifications is completely wrong. The Americans have developed a technology we don't understand. There are secret American bases in Western Europe we have not discovered. or the Americans are using some form of advanced refueling system we are unaware of. The response from high command was silence. Meanwhile, in the skies over Germany, something unprecedented was happening. American fighter pilots were becoming legends. They were staying longer, flying deeper, and fighting with a casual confidence that no German pilot could match. The Luftwaffe had pride. The Luftwaffe had tradition. The Luftwaffe had some of the best pilots in the world. But the Luftwaffe no longer had hope. Because if American fighters could do the impossible, if they could appear where the laws of physics said they couldn't appear, then what hope was there? If the enemy had broken the rules of reality itself, how could you possibly fight them? Klaus finally learned the truth in April 1944. Through a captured American aircraft and interrogation of its pilot, the American fighters weren't violating physics. They were just being physics more creatively than anyone else. The P-51 Mustang had been fitted with something revolutionary: drop tanks, external fuel tanks that could be jettisoned during combat, extending range by hundreds of miles. The Americans had also retrofitted Merlin engines into their fighters, massively improving fuel efficiency. But there was more. American pilot training had fundamentally changed. These weren't young, aggressive pilots flying on instinct. They were disciplined, calculating pilots who understood fuel management like it was religion. They flew at optimal altitudes for fuel efficiency. They managed their throttle with surgical precision. They approached every mission like a mathematical problem that needed solving. The Germans had calculated the range incorrectly because they were calculating for a different type of pilot. When Klaus read the interrogation report, something almost like grief washed over him. Not because the Americans had found the answer, but because the answer had been there all along. It was just that American pilots had been willing to think differently, while German engineers were calculating maximums. American engineers were asking what if, while German pilots were flying aggressive. American pilots were flying smart. The Luftwaffe's entire air defense strategy was built on one assumption: American fighters can't reach Berlin. And now that assumption had been shattered, what happened next was subtle but catastrophic. German pilots stopped believing they could win, not because they lacked skill, they didn't, but because the impossible had become routine. Every mission, the American fighters were there, not where they should be, not where physics said they could be, but there. Over the following months, the Luftwaffe's effectiveness collapsed not from lack of courage, but from a fundamental loss of faith in the basic rules they'd always relied on. Klaus watched it happen. He saw veteran pilots getting shot down by younger Americans. He saw experienced interceptor units requesting transfers. He saw the entire structure of confidence that held the Luftwaffe together simply crumble. The American fighters over Berlin weren't just destroying aircraft. They were destroying belief itself. By mid-1944, the Luftwaffe had effectively lost air superiority over Germany, not because their fighters were suddenly inferior in design, but because American pilots had asked one simple question: what if we could do what everyone says is impossible? And they'd found the answer. Klaus Weissmann survived the war. He lived until 1982, long enough to see the full scope of what had happened. In interviews late in his life, he would always return to that morning in March 1944. "We lost the war in the air," he would say, "when we realized that the impossible was possible. Once you believe that about your enemy, you've already lost." The story of the P-51 Mustang's extended range seems like a minor technical detail in a massive historical conflict. But it was never about the tanks or the engines or the fuel calculations. It was about something deeper. The Luftwaffe lost because they accepted the boundaries of what was possible. American pilots won because they refused to. In the skies over Berlin in 1944, the fundamental battle wasn't physical. It was psychological. It was about who believed in the impossible. The Americans did, and that made all the difference. The P-51 Mustang with drop tanks could fly over 2,000 miles, nearly 5 times the range everyone thought possible. Not because the laws of physics changed, but because someone asked, what if we're wrong about what we think we know? Sometimes history pivots on that question, and the pilots watching impossible fighters over Berlin learned that lesson the hard way.